I have this feeling that food and drink gives us an eye on the presidential soul. And so it's a way, because we're very curious about presidents. And there's this metaphor I use, I call it a presidential pickle. So we want our presidents to be extraordinary people, but we also want them to be a lot like us.
I'm Dalia Colon, and this is The Zest. Citrus, seafood, Spanish flavor, and Southern charm. The Zest celebrates cuisine and community in the Sunshine State. Today, we're bringing you a bonus episode. My conversation with James Beard award-winning food writer Adrian Miller, recorded earlier this year at the Tampa Bay Collard Green Festival. Earlier this season, we heard from Adrian Miller. Nicknamed the Soul Food Scholar, the Denver-based researcher has written several books on African-American culinary traditions, including Black Smoke, African Americans, and the United States of Barbecue, and The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of the African Americans who have fed our first families, from the Washingtons to the Obamas. Adrian's first book, Soul Food, the surprising story of an American cuisine one plate at a time, won the 2014 James Beard Foundation Book Award for Reference and Scholarship. He also appears in the acclaimed Netflix docuseries High on the Hog, How African American Cuisine Transformed America. Now, how's that for a resume? We were so lucky back in February when Adrian visited Florida to headline the Tampa Bay Collard Green Festival. The evening before the main event, he spoke at Collards After Dark at the Cuban Club in Tampa's Ybor City neighborhood. I got to host a conversation on stage with Adrian before a live audience, and he shared tales from the latest topic to catch his interest: beverage preferences of U.S. presidents. We're sharing that conversation with you here on the pod today. Adrian delves into which presidents made their own wine, which abstained, and who drank confiscated booze during Prohibition. He also explores how wine is selected for White House state dinners, which First Lady favored daiquiris, and most importantly, why all of this matters. We are digging into the roots of soul food and drinks with Adrian Miller, better known as the Soul Food Scholar. After a career at the White House, the trained attorney set his sights on researching African-American culinary traditions. Adrian is the author of several books on the subject. You probably grabbed a copy from Tombolo Books on your way in. Some of his books include Black Smoke, African Americans, and the United States of Barbecue, and The President's Kitchen Cabinet, the story of African Americans who fed our first families, from the Washingtons to the Obamas. His first book, Soul Food, the surprising history of an American cuisine one plate at a time, won the 2014 James Beard Award for Reference and Scholarship. I just read it last week. It's now the 10-year anniversary of this book, and it is so fascinating. Every chapter is about a different food, from fried chicken to collard greens to mac and cheese to red drink, which we might get into tonight, we'll see. So this man literally wrote the book on soul food, and he also, like Gabrielle Carter, appears in the acclaimed Netflix docuseries, now in its second season, High on the Hog, How African American Cuisine Transformed America. So Adrian is actually based in Denver, Colorado, but he is here with us in Tampa Bay, fittingly, on this President's Day weekend. Now, tomorrow in St. Pete at the Collard Green Festival, he'll give a presentation about Black chefs in the White House. And tonight, he's serving up a little aperitif about beverages in the White House. Now, what I love about Adrian is that he goes into deep dives about topics I have barely thought about, and by the end, I'm like obsessed with these topics. I could spend the entire hour reading this intro, but I know that's not why we're here. So please help me give a warm welcome and raise our glasses to the soul food scholar himself, Adrian Miller. Okay, so you've obviously done a lot of work around food. What got you thinking about the topic of presidents and what they drink?
So that came from when I did my soul food book. I came across the stories of about 6 people who had cooked for our presidents. So after I finished Soul Food, I said, well, let me just chase this a little bit to see what I might. And based on my own research, I discovered 150 African Americans who have cooked for our presidents. So even though I finished my book in the Obama administration, every president from George Washington to Joe Biden has had an African American cooking for them in some capacity. So I was looking at the food part and I was like, well, let me find out the drink story. And here's the thing, all of our presidents, well, I shouldn't say all of them, most of our presidents have gotten their drink on, but they didn't want the public to know about it. So one of the most interesting cat and mouse games in presidential history is how they got drinks and what they would do, but they wanted to present a wholesome image to the American public.
Wow. So going back to George Washington, what was someone like him drinking?
So back then, the most popular thing was fortified wines. So Madeira, I don't know if you've ever had Madeira, but Madeira, sherry, small beers. And so there was a lot of home brewing back in the day. In fact, Washington had enslaved people brewing beer, but also whiskey. So they were drinking all over the place. And then usually the wines were European wines. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, did that change over the years?
So over the years, people, starting with Jefferson actually, although he loved European wines, people started to get really interested in introducing and growing wines here, and venting wines here, and getting that introduced into the presidential wine cellar. So Virginia started having plantings and other things, but it really wouldn't be until the 20th century that you saw more and more American wines featured in. But other than that, the beers got stronger. People moved away from fortified wine because fortified wine was popular because of the long ship rides across the Atlantic. So it got more flavor and other things like that. When they started to improve distilling and other things here, fortified wines kind of fall by the wayside. And you start to get more cocktails emerging too by the time of the end of the 19th century.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the end of the 20th century because you worked for the Clinton White House, correct?
Right.
What can you tell us about his habits?
So I can't tell you much because I was at the very end of his administration, and I worked on something called the President's Initiative for One America. It was a racial reconciliation thing. So I only met with him every once in a while. And the joke that I tell when I give my presentations is, most people say if they've met President Clinton, he draws you in, he makes you feel like you're the only person in the room. I never got that. Every time I would meet him, I'd say, Mr. President, I get a blank look. I'd say, I'm Adrian Miller, more of a blank look. And then I'd say, I work on your One America initiative. And he would say something like, oh, that's great. And then,
well, I bet he knows your name now.
Yeah.
Okay, so for us, we might have, a drink while we're watching the Super Bowl or to unwind after, a long week. What role did beverages play for a president? Is it similar or does it have like a larger purpose?
So it depends on the drink. So if they're chilling at home, it was usually the favorite drinks that they had. And they would have friends over. So for instance, President Eisenhower was known for having stag parties. So there would be a lot of bourbon and branch water flowing. And then one of my favorite drinking stories of presidents is the Trumans. So the Trumans always loved to have an old-fashioned cocktail before having dinner at the White House. So one of my favorite stories is there was a longtime African-American butler named Alonzo Fields. And Alonzo Fields had been working since the Hoover administration. And in the White House, basically the butlers are in charge of making the drinks. And so the first night that they asked for an old-fashioned, he made it according to the recipe that he'd been doing for decades. And Bess Truman took one sip and didn't say anything. So he knew that was trouble. Very next morning, Bess Truman says to Alonzo Fields, Fields, could you make our old-fashions a little less sweet? We're just not used to having them so sweet. He said, all right. So he reconfigured the recipe. The next time they had it, she takes one sip and doesn't say anything again. And then she complains to the White House usher who was overseeing all the residents. And she said, these are horrible old-fashions. They taste like fruit punch. Word got back to Fields, and he was a little miffed about this. So the next time that they asked for an old-fashioned, he just gave them straight bourbon and ice. Bess Truman takes one sip and said, that's how we like our old-fashions.
They like them strong. Now, what about, okay, they've got the drinks in private. What about like public events, like maybe a state dinner? Who chooses the wines for those?
So that has changed over time. So there's this, originally there was something called a presidential steward who was in charge of managing the entire household. The very first presidential steward for George Washington was a biracial man named Samuel Francis. So that person was in charge of doing all the shopping and picking the wines. Over time, some of the butlers were in charge of doing this. So it changes. But very recently, starting in the Clinton administration, there now is a presidential food and beverage usher. And that person picks the wine. So the person who's been in that position since it started, he's still in that position, is a man named Daniel Sachs. He was a veteran of California wine industry. And so he picks the wines. And so the state dinners are the most public expression of alcohol drinking in the White House. And for 150 years of our history, they were all French wines, because France was the standard for entertaining. But lately there's been a push for American wine. So what happens now is there's a lot of planning that goes into a state dinner. And so they decide what themes they want to evoke in the dinner, and they'll usually try to pick American wines that has some connection to that country. So for a recent dinner for the president of Greece, they got wines made in America by Greek immigrants, just to show that connection. And of course, they go through and try to pair the wine with the courses.
Wow, that's such a deep cut.
Yeah.
What do you think a president's drink of choice says about him, or maybe one day her?
So I have this feeling that food and drink gives us an eye on the presidential soul. And so it's a way, because we're very curious about presidents. And there's this metaphor I use, I call it a presidential pickle. So we want our presidents to be extraordinary people, but we also want them to be a lot like us. And so savvy presidents have figured out ways to talk more about their private lives in ways that fascinate people, and they draw political power from that public appreciation of them. So it's really when people like foreign stuff that we Americans get kind of, like that's kind of shady. But if they like American stuff, the foods of their childhood, nostalgic stuff, all of that stuff, then that gives us a sense of that president. So one who used it to great effect, I think, recently was Obama, because he's one of the few presidents that we've had who loved beer. And he actually homebrewed beer in the White House. So in that president's book that I have here, I have 2 recipes for beer that he brewed in the White House. So if you want to do it at home.
I had no idea. And it's interesting because people always say, well, who do you want to have a beer with? But
Right.
This is literally who you want to have a beer with.
Right, so it gives it that common touch, right? And so that was a way that he used, because I don't know if you remember this, when he was on the campaign trail early, the criticism of him is that people felt he was aloof, kind of distant, and so he was doing these other things to show, no, I'm approachable and, I'm like you, even though he's exceptional and brilliant. He wanted to make that connection.
Yeah, for sure. Now, did all of the presidents drink, or was anyone a teetotaler?
Oh, we had a lot of teetotalers in presidential history. Actually, most recently, so George W. Bush, Donald Trump, and Biden, he drinks a little bit, but not a lot. So of the most recent presidents, it's really been Obama that's kind of been known for that. But one of the earliest teetotalers was a guy named Rutherford B. Hayes, 1876. And so he and his wife, and let me just back up. The temperance movement, we think of prohibition, but the temperance movement in the United States had started well in the 1800s and had gained momentum. So they were always pressuring the White House to not serve alcohol at all. And Rutherford B. Hayes was just about to pronounce that, but the U.S. State Department complained and said, look, our foreign dignitaries are used to wine, so at least you don't have to drink it, but at least serve wine. But they tried to make it non-alcoholic, so his wife, Lucy Hayes, she was called Lemonade Lucy.
Wow, that's interesting. And we're here in Ybor City, which has all sorts of tales, from prohibition and speakeasies and things like that. So I wonder if they were all really towing the line, or if some of them were maybe...
definitely not.
Okay.
So some of the hardest drinking was during Prohibition. Like Warren Harding, Calvin Coolidge, Hoover, they were all having private parties where the liquor was flowing. And here's the really cool thing. Guess where they sourced their liquor?
Oh my gosh, I don't know.
Confiscated liquor.
Oh!
So when the Alcohol Bureau Tobacco, when they would do raids, they would just get all of that liquor and bring it over to the White House.
That's me telling my daughter she can't have Valentine candy in her room and then taking it in my room and eating it.
Yep.
Wow. Now, how do you know this? If they did such a good job of keeping it a secret, how does the soul food scholar know all of this?
I know this because we had a few tell-all memoirs by White House staffers, and they spilled all of those beans. Now, there's a prohibition on writing tell-alls now, unless the White House approves it.
Yeah, there's got to be like an NDA.
Yeah. But they got all their business was just out there.
Wow.
Now, one thing, these servants did wait a few years before they wrote these books. But yeah, that's how we found out. And believe it or not, there are a few receipts hanging around. If you go to the presidential libraries and look in the right place, you will see receipts for alcohol purchases.
Wow, sloppy. Okay, now we've talked a lot about alcohol and teetotalers, but what about other types of beverages? Like, I'm thinking of caffeine. I don't drink coffee necessarily, and I don't know if your research got into this, but it seems like if anyone could use a cup of coffee, it would be the leader of the free world.
Right. Now, we don't have a recipe for this, but White House coffee was quite famous. So people celebrated White House coffee more so in the early 20th century. You don't really hear about coffee these days, but definitely coffee was big, and a number of soft drinks. I have an anecdote, if I may share.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've had two presidents who had a buzzer installed on the desk in the White House to get drinks. Anybody want to guess who those presidents are? Trump was one, yes. Who's the other president? What's that? Nope. Close, Nixon. LBJ.
What kind of sodas are we talking?
So LBJ asked for Fresca. Y'all remember Fresca?
Fresca!
Yeah. And then Trump he's huge on Diet Coke. Yeah. But Obama's favorite drink, even though he likes beer and everything, is Honest Tea.
Okay.
He loved that. And President Biden is a big orange Gatorade fan. So.
Well, here in Florida, we appreciate that because, Gainesville was the home of Gatorade with Dr. King.
I tried to work that in,
Thank you, appreciate that. I'll pay you later, I'll Venmo you. So what do you think is the future of presidential drinks? I mean, we've gone from these French wines to the beers and the Prohibition and the Fresca, which I never thought would come up in this conversation. The next president, or what are they drinking?
Oh, so depends on who it is. So
okay, 2028, what are they drinking?
All right. That's it. So no, I think this trend towards celebrating American wines is going to grow. Right now, we've had wines from California, Virginia, Michigan. I don't know if there's been a Florida wine. There hasn't been a Colorado wine. So I think other presidents are going to start looking at, swing states and other things and try to figure out how to celebrate people in those. But the template is very clear. After a century and a half of looking to Europe, we now focus on America and try to highlight people in this country doing something and connect that. So I think that's going to continue. And, I think we're going to see maybe a more sustainable look at it. So I could see people starting to feature more sustainable wines, that kind of thing.
Okay, in your book, Soul Food, which I just absolutely loved, once again, you have a chapter called Liquid Soul.
Yes.
AKA red drink.
Yes.
What flavor is it? It's red.
Right.
Okay, so for the uninitiated, briefly, what is red drink? And have you ever seen red drink served in the White House?
Yes, so red drink, you have to understand, in soul food culture, red is a color and a flavor. So black people don't call things cherry or strawberry or it has hints of cranberry, it's just red. And I tell people that there is a generational shift happening. There's a lot of young people that like purple and blue. And as I wrote in my book, I do believe the children are our future, that we should teach them well and let them lead the way, but not on drinks.
Good line, you should use that.
So it's just any red colored drink, and the historical connection is this. There are two red drinks from West Africa that come across during the slave trade. Most people have had them but just don't even know. So one is hibiscus, There's a type of hibiscus native to West Africa. It goes by different names, but essentially the drink is this. You get some water, you take the red flower petals, put it in the water, color it red, and sweeten it to taste. The other one are cola nuts. There are cola nuts that are red in West Africa. Same template. Water, drop the nuts in, color it red, sweeten it to taste. So these two drinks come over. Hibiscus, I think, has one of the most interesting stories because when it gets to this side of the world, it takes root in Jamaica where it's called sorrel. And then it starts to spread around Latin America, the Caribbean, and South America, where it's called agua de Jamaica. So if you go to a taqueria and get agua de Jamaica, you're drinking a riff off a West African drink. And given that formula, it's the same as Kool-Aid. So I think Kool-Aid is a nod to those drinks. Yeah.
That's deep.
Get some water, color it red, sweeten the taste.
Yeah. Any Kool-Aid in the White House?
Oh, I haven't seen any reference to Kool-Aid in the White House. I'm sure it was consumed, but I've looked through a lot of stuff and I have not seen it in the White House.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you drink?
Yes.
What's your drink of choice?
So I like rum. So I like rum-based drinks. I like Dark and Stormy. I don't know if you've ever heard that. It's kind of like a rum. Yeah, I like that drink.
Okay.
Cuba Libre, I like that with the twist of lime. I like that. But my favorite drink is actually in my soul food book, and it's a hibiscus tea that's basically hibiscus, ginger, a sweetener, and lime. And you can add rum to that or vodka, and that's really good stuff.
That's a perfect Florida drink. Like I have hibiscus in my yard.
I'm not into whiskey as much, so rum is probably the only hard drink I really, really like.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Seems like you've done a lot of research on this, and you are the soul food scholar. So is this the subject of your next book?
So the next book is going to be on African American street food vendors.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, and this is a tradition that goes back to West Africa. So there's a lot of marketing, and it plays out in this side of the world, dominated by black women. And some of the earliest street vending was happening in the 1700s. For instance, there were black women that were known in New York, in Brooklyn, for walking around selling hot corn and baked pears and dipped in molasses. And so I'm going to show how they represented West Africa in an obvious and subtle way. The foods that they introduced from West Africa, as well as foods that they popularized from other cultures, like hot tamales was a big one, and how they shaped the food scenes of places like New Orleans, Savannah, Charleston, New York, DC, Boston, Chicago. But here's the really cool thing. Between 1880 to 1920, people would listen to African Americans singing or rhyming to get your attention to buy stuff, and they put it down to sheet music. So I have about 100 of those. And what I want to do is get a book deal where I can curate a list of some of those street songs, street cries, narrate them for context, hire somebody who can sing them because you don't want to hear me sing. And then you could know what it was like in 1900s New Orleans to walk around and hear somebody try to get your, buy their stuff.
That audio book. Or podcast, maybe a podcast?
Podcast. I think it could be a podcast if I don't get that, because there's so many, it's rich material.
Yeah.
And I believe in manifestation, so I'm just gonna say something. People ask me, who am I gonna get to sing these street cries? Probably a mix of people, but if Beyonce wants to do a street cry on Lemonade, I'm here for it.
That would be absolutely perfect. Okay, I feel like you're just my uncle and we're hanging out by the fire, but I want to give everybody else a chance to ask questions if you have any. So what questions do you have for the Soul Food Scholar? And I'll bring the mic on down. Oh, you got the extra one? Okay, got Vanna White down here. He's going to bring you a mic.
Fred Sweets.
Amen. Adrian Miller, I need to know, you didn't mention a Democratic teetotaler. So there is one I'm thinking about. I'm pretty sure not only did he keep the press from having drinks, but I don't think he drank himself. And that is and I want to know if there's a correlation between longevity and drinking when we mention Jimmy Carter.
Yeah, okay. So Jimmy Carter, he wasn't profuse about it, but I don't know if you know this, he made wine. So he made wine from his farm in Georgia. So they just didn't do a lot of it, but he definitely, every once in a while, but he wasn't hardcore about it, yeah.
But he offered up the impression that he was not a drinker and didn't want alcohol in the White House.
Well, there's such a thing as public perception, right? So, but I just bought this book on White House wine, and I'll show it to you afterwards. I have it with me. And they talked about him, because I thought the same thing. So that's why I didn't list him. So I don't think, it may be a distinction between wine and hard liquor. I don't think that they drank hard liquor.
And you didn't mention Missouri and wines.
And Missouri wines. No, because I have not found any record of a Missouri wine being served in the White House.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But Missouri is good wine country, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is any particular type, varietal?
Good. It's a low bar in the U.S. I think California's got it made.
Yeah.
So when I say good, it's popular in the Midwest. That's for
Gotcha.
sure.
All right.
We all know that President Lincoln, probably everybody's favorite president, and he seemed to project such a beautiful image of himself. Was there anything related to him when it comes to drinks?
No. So when it comes to food and drink with Lincoln, it's really, it's hard to pin anything down because almost every recollection of him is that he didn't drink or eat that much. I think the weight of the presidency just bore down on him. And see, everybody says he was very sparing in eating and drinking. So we just don't have a lot of great stories about him in the White House when it comes to that. Because I figured that he's one of the most popular presidents, so I was looking for his favorite drink. And the recollections of the people that worked for him and other things just kind of, you got the sense that he just had a lot, and so he didn't really take care of himself in that way.
Yes. Important question, which is, do heavy drinking presidents appoint drinking cabinets, or is it, or they are looking for sober?
Yes, they're called their friends. So all of these presidents that drink a lot, they just have their buddies come over, and they have all kinds of parties. So one thing that I do get asked a lot is if there's a presidential taster, and there actually is. It's usually the opposition leader in Congress.
Yeah, tonight he's at the Cuban Club, tomorrow he's at the Tampa Improv. Doing his comedy act. What other questions do you have for the Soul Food Scholar? Yes, in the red leather jacket. Here he comes.
Lillian Dunlap.
I didn't recognize you. Hi, sitting next to Mary.
How are you? Hey, I spent some time in Missouri, so I know about Bess. What about the other first ladies? How much drink on did they get?
Great question.
Yeah, so because of the double standard, our first ladies are supposed to be paragons of virtue. You just don't hear a lot about them drinking. It's usually the focus is on the husbands. Except one first lady and her husband loved one drink, and that was Jacqueline Kennedy. I mean, they loved French wine and all that stuff, but they loved, you want to guess what the drink is that they loved? Nope. Nope. Think tropical.
Pina colada.
Nope. Close. Nope.
Daiquiri.
Daiquiris. So I gotta tell this story.
Yeah,
this is one of the juiciest presidential drinking stories. So when the first lady was away, the president would often order daiquiris and Vienna sausages. And what this signaled to the White House, and then he would tell the staff to go home. So that's when things got freaky in the White House.
That was the sock on the door.
Yep. So we've got stories.
Too far? It's JFK.
So we've got stories of White House butlers looking at JFK naked in the pool with some other people. And that's when they knew. So they would just kind of wait and gather around. So JFK noticed the butlers seeing this. So that's when the White House windows for the pool got frosted. So nobody could look in there.
Wow.
Daiquiris and Vienna sausages.
Daiquiris and Vienna sausages. We're just going to move right past that.
Yes, so you said that food and drink offers a glimpse into the soul of the president. So I'm curious about what you saw in the souls of these presidents through this lens.
So to me, it really just showed if the president was savvy about presenting an image that they had a common touch. Because I'm taking them at their word that this is something that these are foods and drinks that they actually liked. But some of our presidents, the ones that seemed more aloof, wouldn't talk about how they entertained in the White House and all of these other things. And my point is that a savvy president understands if the American public likes me, I get political power out of that. So I've been surprised that so many presidents haven't really used this aspect because they do it on the campaign trail. That's why they're showing up at county fairs, flipping pancakes and eating all kinds of stuff. And I don't know why they lose that when they get in the White House. It's just weird to me. So I think to me, it's always been, the more open a president has been about food, it just shows me that they're savvy and they understand that they can derive power from being more connected to the American people.
Thank you for being here tonight. In your research, we know Prohibition was a big part of our history. Did you find any information about presidents navigating Prohibition and their stance? And did they drink a little bit even though it was illegal in the White House?
Oh, they drank a lot, even though it was illegal in the White House. So yeah, they navigated it because the press would ask, and they were always dodging it. So you can go and look at newspaper articles, and they always dodged it. And then at some point, they just wouldn't answer the question. So everybody knew what was going on, but they would never publicly say that they were drinking in the White House. And this is during Prohibition. So again, in private, and it's a different time, right? The press would ask about stuff, but we don't have the press that we have now where everybody's trying to get all up in your business. There was a distance that people kind of respected. So it was a wink, wink, nod, nod. But yeah, there was a lot of liquor flowing in the White House. And FDR was a big martini guy, and he actually mixed his own martinis. There was one he called the Haitian libation, which most people thought was god-awful, but it was something that he liked. So yeah, so you see it teased out. There's newspaper articles about it, and you can see in some presidential records like being asked about it and strategizing, but it was really nothing that ever surfaced to the point where it's a scandal. It was actually more of a scandal before Prohibition. One of the stories that I love to tell is about Theodore Roosevelt. After he left office, some editor in a small newspaper who didn't like him basically said he was a drunk. So Theodore Roosevelt knew what this meant to his reputation, so he actually sued the guy, and it went to trial. And in the trial, he recounted every drink he had in his life as part of his testimony. Now, this evoked a reaction from the St. Louis press because this is going to sound like another president. He said that he drank a mint julep from a famous black bartender. He said he took a sip and didn't like it. Right. So the St. Louis Globe Democrat wrote this long editorial, because the butler was named Tom Bullock, who's famous black bartender, and said there is no way that somebody could just take a sip of this black bartender's mint julep and stop. And so they knew he was lying, right? But he ended up winning, and the damages he was awarded was $1. But that's how much was at stake for reputation if people thought that you drank too much.
You talked about the black butlers, and obviously you have a whole book on the black chefs in the White House. You also talked about people who had different preferences for sweetness and things like that. So was there a big learning curve? Because most of the presidents have been white. Most of the people serving have been black. How do we bridge that gap?
So what was interesting to me is the way I like to think about it, and it's tough because there is a serious culture of secrecy around the White House. And a lot of it is on the part of the servants. They want to be known as people where our first family can completely let their guard down and feel at home. So a lot of the stuff we just don't know. We have those few tell-all books, but a lot of stuff we don't know. So I'm trying to glean things from newspapers and oral histories and things like that. So what I like to tell people is I think that this black staff gave presidents a window on black life that they may not otherwise have had. Now, not everybody chooses to look through that window, but who did, we do see an effect on U.S. history. Real quick example, Lyndon Baines Johnson had a black cook named Zephyr Wright, who was facing discrimination. So when the family would drive from Central Texas to D.C., they would drive through the segregated South. Zephyr Wright could not eat with the family, go to the bathroom. So she just refused, and she stayed in D.C. full time. And so LBJ, when he was lobbying for the 1964 Civil Rights Act, used her Jim Crow experiences to mobilize support for that bill. And when the bill passed, when presidents sign bills, they use 100 pins. He gave her one of the pins and said, "You deserve that as much as anyone." Yeah.
I love that story. That was my timer to wrap it up, but I just can't because you have so many good stories, and that's an example of why this matters. It's not just about the food and the drinks, but it's like a window into so many other things. So you mentioned that the right drink can show the public who you are. If you were running for president, which please do that. If you were running for president in the upcoming election, what would you drink? What's the drink that would connect with the American people in 2024?
Bud Light. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. No, seriously, I would do red drink. Because it would be a teaching moment, right? And I think I could share a little bit about my culture. So I would definitely go with red drink. And I would just leave it like that.
I love that answer.
Yeah.
It speaks for itself. Was there anything else you want to tell us tonight about the beverages of the presidents?
No, I think we got a flavor for it, and the stories that I wanted to tell, I got to share. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. He flew through the snow, 2 a.m. the other night. And he really is, I mean, just on a personal note, I'm such a fan. You're on my Mount Rushmore of foodies. I just admire your work so much. I told you this when we talked a few months ago, but you're an American treasure.
Oh, thank
so
you.
thank you for being here. Ladies and gentlemen, the soul food scholar, Adrian Miller. That was Adrian Miller, aka the Soul Food Scholar, speaking with me at the Tampa Bay Collard Green Festival in February 2024. This conversation was recorded at the Cuban Club in Tampa's historic Ybor City neighborhood. That's all for this bonus episode of The Zest. We'll be back soon with Season 10. I'm Dalia Colon. I produce The Zest with Andrew Lucas and Alexandria Ebron. The Zest is a production of WUSF, copyright 2024, part of the NPR network.